everybody in here? So what did you learn from that? Go ahead.
That no matter how many obstacles in your way, you can still achieve your goal.
Very good. That's excellent. How about anybody else?
What he said.
You know, I think that movie kind of resonates a little bit with what I'm going to talk about today, because, you know, basically what he imagined or visioned for his life was something that was really unattainable to some degree. You know, he imagined himself playing football at Notre Dame. He was like 5'6", 160 pounds, and he also didn't have any support. So he actually did achieve his goal. And that reminds me of, there's a book by there's an author by the name of Jack Canfield, who wrote the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. I don't know if you ever saw those. He talks about basically about the characteristics of a highly successful person, that they're able to persevere despite obstacles in life. The other thing he talked about was having a vision for your life, or seeing yourself in the future. And that's something I'll talk a little about today. So to start with, I have to go back to when I was 12 years old in 1972. And in those days, oftentimes I was in the basement. My parents had a neat basement. They had a pool table, a stock bar with liquor. And on a summer day in 1972, my friend David pulled a bottle of brandy out and dared me to drink it. Of course, I didn't want to dare, so I went ahead and took a big drink. And I remember two things at that point when I drank the brandy. One was, of course, I gagged when the brandy went down my throat. And secondly, I felt something different. I felt a sense of calm and confidence really for the first time. That's something that didn't come easily for me during that age group. Unlike now, being a STEM kid, you know, really being into science was not really cool back in the early 1970s. So I was different. So being different as a kid growing up, oftentimes you weren't really accepted, and oftentimes I was bullied. So I had a lot of that, you know, during those early years. So that feeling of confidence that I had was something I wanted to keep going back to. So for the next year or so, I would sneak the liquor from my parents. And amazingly enough, I would go to convenience stores and I would stand there with a $5 bill. I was 14 years of age by that time. And I would say, would you buy me a 6-pack of beer? And we would always count how many times would I have to do that before they would do that. 4 or 5 times. And nowadays they'd probably be arrested, but anyways, it didn't happen then. On my 15th birthday, I made the decision that I was going to go into a bar and drink. So I borrowed my dad's leather coat, and I was sporting a big mullet back in those days. If you look at pictures in the 1970s, I don't have a picture of myself here, but big, huge hair. And I went into the bar. Of course, I was nervous, and kind of made my voice a little deeper, and asked the old bartender, yeah, can I have a Budweiser? And surprisingly enough, he served me. And that was really important, because I sat there that night and drank all night with a bunch of people that were probably 30s, 40s, 50s. I felt accepted. And that's something that's very common with people that become alcoholics, is that they like that community of drinkers. But after that, things got a little bit darker for me. After my freshman year in high school, I left. I started drifting from job to job, frequently drinking, sometimes getting high. And by the time I was 17, my parents made the decision that they would sign me into the U.S. Navy, which I did go. Not a great place for drinkers to be in the Navy, but anyways. But going forward, basically I had a series in the next 30 years, because I'm going to jump forward 30 years. I had a lot of successes, failures, but one thing that was always there was the fact that drinking was a part of my life. And that symbol of me going in by myself to a bar was something that I did a great deal of during that time. So today I want to talk about 3 lessons I learned from my life that I would like to share with you. And the first lesson is, who do I want to be, or who do you want to be? And so for my life, let me talk about how I learned that. Going back to January the 5th, 2002, I woke up early in the morning and rolled over and realized that my bed was wet and it was not from water. And I went into the bathroom and looked at myself that morning. And what I saw was not the usual handsome dude you see here, supposed to get a laugh from that, but rather something that was pretty disturbing. My face was actually a little bit yellow because I was jaundiced from drinking. I had a large lump on my forehead. I had fallen the night before, didn't remember because I had a blackout. I looked at myself and I heard a voice whisper to me that said, "Stop drinking." And I decided I was going to get some advice from some people. So I went to, actually it was a former girlfriend I was seeing at the time. Her name was Barb. We did a lot of heavy drinking together, but I said, I think I should stop drinking. And she said, "You're not an alcoholic. I mean, you go to work every day. Besides, I like it when you drink." Great advice, I thought. I decided to ask a good friend, Paul, the same question. And he said, "I'm so glad that you're thinking about this. A number of times you drove drunk and I didn't say anything to you." And he had confronted me actually a few times. I just got angry. So he said, "Please consider stopping." So I thought that morning that I had two choices. One choice to continue the way I am. I was facing my second DUI. I was facing censoring of my medical license. I was facing losing my career. I had managed to estrange myself from my son. Not really a good situation. That was one choice. The second choice was to check myself in and stop drinking. I chose the second. So that night, I walked to the hospital and said the most important words probably of my entire lifetime. "I'm an alcoholic. I can't stop drinking. Will you please, I need help." So they admitted me to a suicide watch bed in the emergency room. And I remember laying there and seeing the glass doors locked and the curtains, and thinking deep into the night about how I got to the point that I did. And by early in the morning, I actually wanted to check myself out because I was starting to get withdrawal symptoms. But at that time, the voice that I'd heard before, "Stop drinking," became clear to me again that it was saying, "Stop drinking or die." So the third lesson I learned from all this was accepting who you are. And in my case, I needed the help of my drug and alcohol counselor. His name was Bill. And Bill dressed like a cowboy, wore cowboy hats and that kind of stuff. Listened to Kenny Rogers. And I liked Kenny Rogers, but I didn't like Bill very much. See, Bill was very radical in his approach. He believed that the 12 steps, which is nothing wrong with that, was the only way. I during rehab, wanted to really think through how I got to that point. I intellectualized it. So he'd confront me. We had a pretty tense relationship. But I remember on the 27th day, I was glad to see him because it was the last day. I was going to graduate from rehab, and I was going to be going home. So he pushed a piece of paper at me that morning, which read, diagnosis, alcohol abuse, family history of alcoholism, parents, brother, prognosis for long-term sobriety, 10%. I remember being really angry, saying, "How dare you say that I only have a 10% chance of success?" He said, "I don't think you're going to make it. I see people come and go. I don't give you much of a chance." So a couple months later, I decided to return to one of the scenes of the crime, as it would be. There was a bar called Mickey's that I frequented on many nights. I oftentimes would sing karaoke and deep into the night, imagining myself to be the next American Idol. Not really. So before I could even sit down at the bar, the regular bartender had slid a bottle of ice cold Coors Light in front of me. My favorite beer at the time. I sat down and remember looking at that for a long minute. And every inch of my being wanted to drink that. As a matter of fact, I could even imagine my hand reaching for that. But something stopped me. It was actually the 10%. I remember thinking, 10% chance. And so I pushed it away and ordered a Diet Coke. And I realized that day that Bill had really done me a great favor. He had given me a gift of a challenge. He either underestimated me grossly or it was all intentional. So anybody ever been underestimated in your life? You know, think about what that was. I mean, how do you react to that? I mean, you can say, yeah, you're right, I'm not gonna make it. Or you can do something even different than that. Okay. So what I learned thus far to that, and I remember thinking through that, is that the first step that I talked about, which was, who do I want to be? It had to be reimagined, or it had to be repeated every day. So thinking about where my life wanted to go from that point, you know, I had aspirations of doing a number of things, including getting my PhD and going on, etc. It stalled, basically. I wasn't going anywhere. So after that, I imagined myself not only being sober, but going farther. But I had to think about the steps I had to take to achieve the goals I had set for myself. I also had to take the steps to never drink again. And I can tell you that those people who have experienced alcohol abuse, who have to stay sober, it means that you have to, on a daily basis, make an intentional decision to walk away from it. And you know, it took a number of years, but I'm comfortable with people drinking around me now. It doesn't bother me a bit. But you know, that had to be something I had to potentially do. And accepting who I am, or who I wanted to be, was something that also took time through the years, and I'll come to that in a little bit. So after that, I started to realize the benefits of that lesson that I learned. An example of that was 2.5 years later, I remember being on the lawn of Andrews University here in Michigan. I was going to get my PhD that day. I was going to be hooded. And I remember thinking to myself how fortunate I really am to be there. My parents were there, my siblings were there, and I remember seeing my mother looking with pride about how I had gotten through that and I'd gotten that degree. And that really, to me, was the first real step of how far I had come from that. But I was to find that whole process of becoming the person I wanted to be and accepting that was something that would continue. So an example of that was, in 2016, I was offered a position here at CMU as the division director of the PA program. And basically that's been the culmination of 15 years of hard work, research, scholarship, teaching, national service. And I thought to myself, now I have the American dream. But there was something else that was missing at that time, because I kept hearing kind of a voice whispering to me that I needed to tell this story. You see, I was really kind of ashamed of this story, because very few people knew about it. And in the circles that I was in, it's not something you're going to tell easily. So in early 2017, I sat down and began to pen some of the things in my life. And it took me a few months, and I wrote, the book is called Labyrinth, which it's on Amazon, but anyway. And I also decided I was going to start telling the story, but I didn't know how. So I decided to do what I always did, was get the help I needed. So I hired a professional speaker, he's a national class speaker, to mentor me. And he worked with me and I developed the skills. So again, an example of the 10%, I don't think I had 10% of the skills to really be a good public speaker. Not that I do yet, but I started to get there. So what I want, actually before I go on, I want to pause for a second. I have some forms when we finish, and they're just testimonial forms that if you want to talk about or write a little bit about the story today or the message, I'd appreciate it. You don't have to, but it's just something I'd like to. So I'd like to have a little exercise with you today. I'd like all of you to close your eyes. Close your eyes. I want you to all think about, in terms of the person that you want to be. Is there a goal that you haven't yet achieved that you want to achieve? Is there an area of your life you know has to be improved? What is it? Put it in your mind, imagine it. Okay? Now, keeping that there, think about what are the steps that you'd have to take in order to achieve that. Think about how you're going to put that into action. And then I want you to think about what your 10% will be in this. What are you going to have to give up in order to achieve your goal? See, folks, I believe that any of you are capable of doing whatever you want to do. And it's one thing that I learned from my life journey is that it's all a matter of desire. And if you can visualize where you want to go, it's the first step of getting there. So thank you. Anybody have any questions?